doing an old master copy from this particular Rubens drawing. I have it printed to 10 inches on the vertical to 8 inches on the horizontal. I have my paper formatted here. I wanted to mention that I actually moved in a little bit from the edges of the paper, about 4 inches. And the reason I did that is because this is a pretty light paper, so it gets banged up quite a bit. So I'm trying to preserve the middle of the paper here. This particular paper that I'm using is a 500 series Strathmore charcoal paper, tan toned, and right here it's 64 pounds. So it's a pretty light paper as opposed to this toned gray Strathmore paper, which I'll probably be using for more drawings. It's pretty light, but it's a gray tone, and this is an 80 pound, and 80 pound is typically the standard Strathmore paper. So because it's lighter, I have to protect it. The edges get banged up pretty easily. The other thing is the paper is 100% cotton, which makes it a really nice paper, but also a paper that can be bruised a lot. Because I'm working from this particular Old Master drawing, I actually printed this on my printer. You can see that this is a cream toned paper here, and I did my best to match the actual value and the color of the paper as best I could on what I could find. But that's not terribly important. A paper this light, you'd probably go white would be totally fine, and then if it was a gray or darker paper, you could just switch to the gray paper if you'd want to. The other thing that I'm doing here is I'm putting inch marks. I'm going to assume that this is actually square here because of the image is printing at the format of the paper. So I'm starting here, and I'm actually using my ruler, and I'm coming in and I'm measuring inch by inch all the way down to 10. 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, and I'm just putting those marks there, and then I'm coming back and I'm just highlighting it with a pink highlighter. Doing the same on this side, so I'm running from 1 to 8. I put my numbers here, so I have number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and then starting on this side, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and these are going to be my vertical lines and my horizontal lines as they're going across. I backed it with a piece of cardboard from an Amazon box. I just did that to better protect the reference. So for this, the first thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to place my acetate, which as you can see is a clear paper, and comes in a pad. Now the problem with the acetate is it's not very large, so this is a 9 inch by 12 inch pad, and so the printout has to conform to that size pretty much. So I find it to be the easiest to format it somewhere around the size of printer paper, which is 8.5 by 11, and that way you can guarantee that your acetate will fit on top of it. Otherwise, if you print bigger than that, it's going to be harder because you'll have to find another printer. And then on top of that, the acetate will have to be tiled, so this makes it pretty easy. I'm going to take my acetate, and I'm going to take a Scotch tape, and I'm going to put a little bit of give, but I'm going to tape it down at the top. I'm going to talk about this in a second because you're going to want to not only lift this grid and acetate, you're also going to want to be able to take it off eventually. So I have it set that way. I need it to lay flat, so I'm going to put these ones on the bottom, but eventually I'm going to take the bottom off, and this will prevent me, or give me the ability to actually lift the grid off of it and then to put it back down. So I'm just going to put these pieces of tape down to hold this down onto the drawing. It doesn't have to be totally secure, it's just enough for me to actually put my lines on. With the grid itself, on top of the acetate, I'm going to use this Bic ink colored ink pen. And I'm going to do that because I know Bic is going to dry on this grid properly so that it doesn't smudge if I actually move it. It's going to take a little bit of time to dry, but it will eventually dry. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to put my horizontal lines into my grid. Now my grid is going to be pretty easy. I'm not going to format it in a crazy way. I'm going to make this one 1 inch by 1 inch squares. Like I said, the print is on an 8.5 by 11 inch paper, which is perfect because it's easy to do this onto a home printer as long as you have ink. I'm actually using the colored pencil because the colored pencil is going to stand out a little bit more than black. It'll actually separate itself from the black of the drawing. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. This is a very slippery surface acetate, so make sure that you're careful and you're using your ruler as a guide when you're putting these particular lines in. Just a little bit more. Another reason why it's good to have the side stuff here is if a pen starts to dry up on you, you could use it for that. You could also use it for just kind of playing around and doing studies on the side of the paper if you choose to do so. It's always there. Okay. One thing about the paper too is it is probably going to be 90 degrees, so you can always use the corner of the paper to determine lines if you need to. Okay, now I'm going to put my horizontal in. The other thing about the blue pen is that it's a little bit easier to see if the pen is actually writing on the acetate. It's not a wonderful surface to write on. It doesn't want to take the ink very well, so you have to kind of keep going over it and over it and over it. What I want to do here is I want to show you the line of the grid over the acetate. You could see the blue, and in the area such as, let's try to focus this a little bit, the area of the head, you could say I actually created a cross line within the square grid. Just make sure that when you put it onto your paper that everything conforms directly to what's on this grid. Okay, you can see the 1 inch by 1 inch squares as I'm going down. You can see the separation of the blue from the black. You can see the tonality and the color of the paper in relation to the paper that I'm going to be drawing on as I'm going. Okay, and I could take that acetate and I have it tiled up at the top, so I could just lift it up as I'm working. There's going to be a point where the drawing is going to be just fine, and all I would have to do at that point is just take the acetate grid off and just work from the piece. So really the grid is mostly to structure your drawing, get your drawing absolutely perfect. One of the benefits of working from the grid is to be able to analyze the positive and negative space, proportions, measurements, and that kind of stuff. So it's a tedious process. I probably would never work with the grid on my own work, but in terms of being able to analyze distances, proportion, positive, negative space, it's an amazing exercise. So what I'm going to do is I'll come back in a little bit when I have the grid on the paper, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I'm going to actually measure everything out and transfer it over